If overhead and profit were simply a percentage issue, courts would have resolved it decades ago. But they did not, because judges were never being asked to decide a number. They were being asked to decide reasonableness. And to understand that, you have to look at when courts weighed in and what they were actually deciding. Most of the overhead and profit case law emerged between 1990s and late 2000s. This was a period of transition. Standardized estimating software became widely used. Claim volume increased. Speed and consistency became priorities. And with that, disputes became more common. Courts began seeing the same question again and again. Is overhead and profit owed automatically, or only when the general contractor is reasonably necessary? One of the most frequently cited cases comes out of Florida in 2009. In Trinidad versus Florida Peninsula Insurance Company, the court addressed this question directly. What the court did not do was say overhead and profit is always owed. What it also did not do was say that it's never owed. Instead, the court focused on necessity. The ruling made it clear that if the nature of the work reasonably requires a general contractor to coordinate, supervise, and manage the repair, then overhead and profit may be appropriate. Not because of formula, but because of responsibility. Around the same time, other courts echoed this reasoning. In cases like Me versus Safeco Insurance Company and Goff versus State Farm Florida Insurance Company, courts again avoided fixed percentages and returned to the same core principle. The question was not how much overhead and profit was being claimed. The question was whether the scope of work reasonably required management. Notice the pattern? Judges were not debating software rules. They were not debating 10 and 10. They were asking deeper questions. Does this job involve multiple moving parts? Does the work require sequencing? Does someone have to coordinate trades? Is someone responsible for the outcome beyond performing labor? That is not a pricing question. That is a management question. This is where many modern misunderstandings come from. As estimating software simplified pricing, overhead and profit became associated with shortcuts. Single trade versus multi-trade, withhold percentages. But courts never adopted those shortcuts as absolutes. They treated them as guidelines, not rules. Judicial language consistently returned to words like reasonable, necessary, complex, coordination, supervision, not words like automatic, guaranteed, standard percentage. That distinction matters. Here's the part that most people miss. A job does not have to look complex on paper to be complex in practice. Complexity can exist quietly in sequencing requirements, in safety considerations, in code compliance, in occupant coordination, in documentation burden, in liability exposure. These things don't always announce themselves, but courts recognize them. That's why judges resisted turning overhead and profit into a universal rule. Overhead and profit was never meant to be automatic, but it was never meant to be dismissed without context either. It lives in the middle where responsibility exists. This is why arguing overhead and profit as a percentage almost always misses the point. Historically and legally, the real question have always been the same. Who is managing the job? Who is responsible for the outcome? And what does that responsibility require? We don't argue overhead and profit. We document the work that already exists. When responsibility is clear, the reasoning follows. That is the art of noticing.
If you want more of Mana, like and subscribe for more.